this is going to be our first of probably four, maybe three looms. We'll see what happens here. But what I'm going to do, the first one's going to be art as a medium. I'm going to introduce the lesson. I'm going to explain some things to you. Then I'm going to jump into mannerism, and that's going to help in that loom, okay? So let's go ahead and start. Art as a medium. This is something I just want to make sure you understand. Art, before the advent of newspapers and social media, computers, etc., art was a primary form of sending out messages. And this is not me making it up. It absolutely is true. And just make sure you understand, put that in perspective. But as we start that, I do like the piece behind it. It's I think it's a cool piece. It is a Baroque piece of a Medusa by a guy named Peter. It's about Rubens. But you can check that out a little bit later if you wanted to. But it's a pretty detailed painting. But what we're going to look at is what are we going to learn in this lesson? First, we're going to talk about how art was used to tell history of its own era. As a historian, you can get insight from art. We're going to talk about how art evolved through the 2 centuries, and we're going to be able to identify specific genres, I hope. And you'll be able to see some differences between Mannerism, Baroque, Dutch Realism, and French Classicism. So that's kind of where we're headed. So let's go ahead and look at this. Let's go ahead and start now. And this is an interesting piece. This is Mannerism. This guy is really weird. This guy that paints this stuff. He uses fruit. He uses plants. He uses different things to illustrate it. His name's like Archimoldo. If you just Google, if you're interested in him, you just Google fruit portraits, and Mannerism. He'll pop up. But again, I just thought that was an interesting piece. It just looks absurd. And when I think of Mannerism, it's about the absurdity of the era. And we know already it's the art of the late Renaissance. So I've already introduced that to you during the Renaissance. But let's go ahead and start. All right, so what is Mannerism? Mannerism, it's an Italian and Spanish artistic movement from the 1520s to 1600s. It is related to the collapse of the High Renaissance. What's that event, guys? I hope you remember, 1527, fall of Rome. It reflected the intellectual paradigm during this chaotic Reformation. So remember, guys, Reformation, Christendom's over, different religions. There's a sense of chaos, but also it's the beginning of the scientific revolution. And 1540s, you have these new ideas about the body and the universe, and that's going to unfold this chaos. Remember, what was once true is no longer true, and that's going to be the art of the era. That's going to be the art. When I think of this art, it really is. The one Mannerist artist I need you to know is El Greco. He's from your textbook, but he's also the most important. And we see this cool piece here, Vision of St. John's of opening of the fifth seal. And I just want to point out, there's nothing but chaos in that picture. You have these different random areas of people, right? It's almost as if they're stickers on top of each other. I'm not even sure what this guy's laying on. Is he standing? What's he doing? You have weird naked people in the back. You see that really kind of a eerie green and yellow mountains behind it. There's no order. There's no balance. Everything about the High Renaissance was about balance, simplicity, organization. Mannerism is the exact opposite. And that's how they felt. The sack of Rome, the Italian wars, they believed Charles V was the Antichrist. They believed the end of the world was coming. They had these other aspects of this. And that's what the art is showing. If you're more interested into it, I definitely encourage you to read what is Mannerism. You can click on that link on the PowerPoint. But let's go ahead and move on. I do want to point out, some art historians believe that the way it's called Mannerism is it's in the manner of Michelangelo. And this is the piece. If you don't remember, this is the Last Judgment, painted around 1531, I believe it was the year. And remember, we talk about this great detail. Jesus is way on top. There's chaos. There's a lot of, it's not as proportioned as the other pieces were. And it's just that chaos. So that's one of those things. But let's look at these. And again, I don't think you have to know these guys. I just like to show these pieces to get you a feel of it. Pantormo, the deposition. I want to point out the awkward color of dead Jesus, almost a green. I want you to see how uncomfortable this is. And you can see La Pieta. Remember that La Pieta? This is the arm. We see this kid here is not sure. He's struggling to uphold. And when you look at Jesus, he's not that heavy. So it's kind of chaotic. I want to show you, again, this piece. Full. It's not spacious. It's compact. There's very little space. And even in the space, he puts a cloud. This position is really about, I do ponder, look at the time. We see this is painted during the collapse of the sack of Rome. It's the idea that in some ways I believe this artist is saying that the high Renaissance is dead and he's hoping for a resurrection. So that's one of those things. I do think it's interesting, the coloration, very very bright. In some ways, you might say it looks a little bit like a Raphael piece, which I think you can definitely see that. But that's Patormo. Parmigiano, his Madonna with a long neck, around 1540, not a big deal. I want to point out some really interesting things here. Look at the tiny head and the tiny feet. And yet, it looks almost like a diamond, doesn't it? Baby Jesus sits on the wide hips of this really petite girl. Baby Jesus has a La Pieta feel, very similar to the La Pieta by Michelangelo. What is manners about this? Look at how long the baby is. Look at the fingers. Look at the neck. Long. Look at this leg. Long. Not sure what this guy's doing here. If you want to research it, you can. But look at that. It's about exaggeration. It's about unbalance. Look at that. There's no balance to this piece at all. And there's a sense of chaos in it. And in 1540, think about it. This is the moment in which we're still in the Italian Wars. Bad things are still happening. We're in the midst of the Catholic Reformation. The most reactionary Pope Paul IV is there. So I do think this piece has a lot of that. Tintorino's Last Supper. Love another Mannerist piece. When you look at this is clearly Mannerism. Look at the angle of the table. So chaotic, right? You got these lines. All over the place. And you just see that, and all of a sudden you begin to see this very uncomfortable aspect. You see some odd light. That's an odd light. And yet Jesus is the brightest of lights. I do think in the 1590s, it's almost as if Tintorino is talking about that no matter how mundane or ordinary your life, no matter how dark or chaotic you are, you can always find salvation. I do think there's some truth to my interpretation of that piece. But again, Tintorino, clearly Mannerist. I do think there's two pieces you do need to know about Mannerism. The first one's in your book, Lacombe. You already studied that. But here, I love this piece, the purification of the temple. I hope you see one of the things Mannerist, very unbalanced again. You have chaos, anxiety, angst, mundane, ordinary. You see these guys looking on. They're confused. They're not sure what's going on. And the story is all about Jesus here purifying the temple. These guys were corrupt religious people selling animals unworthy of being sacrificed, and yet they're making money. And Jesus is literally whipping them, overturning the tables in the chaos. And here you see a table overturned. Again, kind of weird with all these people. It's such a small one. But again, I do think El Greco's calling the Spanish Catholics to purify their own temple. And this was about manners, about the chaos. I think it's so obvious it's El Greco because of the artistic style, the painting, the colors. And even look at Jesus. Look how disproportionate he is. So that's Mannerism. I hope you kind of see that, and I hope it makes sense.